Greetings brothers and sisters, hope you're all doing well. In this video I thought I'd give a brief behind the scenes look into my new Minecraft animation, Closing the Gap. So for an animation that breaks a 5-year gap from the last one, I wanted to make something that is both nostalgic for my old videos, where it continues the story of the mascots of the channel, as well as take some creative risks for my channel that bring in the new influences I've gathered during the years. For starters, you'll notice that I've redesigned the protagonist character who has appeared a lot in my prior animations, and on top of that I've slapped the name SL onto him. Which, if you think about it, is kind of a pun because it's the initials of a channel name, S and L, haha, badumts. I did this for a couple reasons. One, I have plans for the kind of story arc SL goes through in future animations, and I wanted his design to properly reflect that in time for when it comes. The old design just wouldn't suffice for me in that aspect, and I wanted him to feel less cliche. Two, I wanted to personify him more, and by giving him a name and adding certain signifiers to his design shows more about who he is. Overall, I tried my best to redesign him in a way that reminds you of your design while still feeling fresh and like he's grown up. Darren and Alex largely stayed the same. Though, you'll notice in most of the characters I've now introduced facial rigs. This was in large part to a very helpful addition to Minimator, a program called Model Bench, which lets you sculpt your own Minecraft character models. And while I still have a lot to learn about modeling and rigging and want to test its limitations more, this was leaps and bounds helpful in designing custom characters. I'll dive more into my method of designing the models in a moment. So, what about the animation direction? What did I do to make the characters move and act the way they do? Well, for the time I was away, there's one thing you should know about how my animation tastes have changed. I am a sucker for 3D animation that gives off the illusion it's 2D. This is animation where you know the characters are all 3D models, but move in such a way where it reminds you of 2D animation. Let me demonstrate this further. First of all, I used a technique used a lot in 2D, which I unashamedly ripped off borrowed the idea from Into the Spiderverse. It's called animating on twos, which is basically animating on every other frame. Typically, animation runs at 24 frames per second. A new image for every one of those frames is called animating on ones. Animating on twos is half the amount, which is the same as 12 frames per second. And that's what I did here. What this does is, it recreates a similar crunchy sort of look that is found in 2D and is used interchangeably with ones. For much faster, more skillful movement, like the arrow firing from the crossbow in slow motion and SL kicking the sand block midair, those were animated on ones. But things like this shot where Darren jumps over this ledge or when the pillagers fall into a ravine are animated on twos. Sometimes I'd alternate between them, like this scene where SL is at the train station, he's animated on twos, but the camera is on ones. This can bring a dynamic aesthetic depending on what it is you're animating and how you use it. Another technique is the way I did the effects animation, mainly smears and action lines. They're a great way to amplify the fast motion of an action and help your brain calculate the path of said action if it went by too fast. For instance, the trail left by the arrows after being launched from the crossbows. If it weren't there, you wouldn't be able to tell where it went, let alone see it launch. Or in this scene where Darren kicks the pillager down the ravine. It would have looked fine if it didn't have the action lines in smear, but having those there plus the sound effects just amps the impact even more. The smears can help visualize an arc formed by emotion, especially emotion too fast for your eye to even notice, like when the characters swing their limbs. Like again, when Darren kicks the pillager in the face, or, my personal favorite, when Darren flails his arm and leg over the ravine. One last technique I'll bring up are impact frames, which was borrowed from anime. They're only on screen for about 2 or 4 frames, but are, again, another tool for adding extra punch to an action. Think of it like a quick flash, like what you see from an explosion when it's so quick the camera is overwhelmed by the bright light and unable to register it. Okay, this is technically my first time having created character models myself for Minecraft animation. And while I realize there's room for improvement and I'm open to constructive criticism, here's my thought process behind it. While I still freaking love the look of facial rigs that others have made, whether it's through Minimator or Maya or whatever, part of me didn't really want to follow the trend of smooth round shapes in the mouth and eyes and whatnot. Part of Minecraft's aesthetic is pixels, right? So I wanted to keep that pixel look in the faces while still being flexible enough for expressiveness. SL's irises are 3x3 pixels with a single pixel on its own timeline for the pupil. Same approach with the pillager rigs. I animated the pupil here as it shrinks to the bright light of a phone screen. The mouth is, in my opinion, the most interesting part. What a normal facial rig would do is allow you to move the mesh around in the cheeks, lips, tongue, or whatever to create certain shapes. Here, to keep its pixel look, I went with the stop motion approach and used what's called replacement animation. It's where, in order to move something from one frame to the other, instead of moving the mesh, they swap the entire part altogether. So what I did was, I used Photoshop to create different looking pixel art mouth shapes and saved them as PNG files. The rig itself has its own animatable timeline for the mouth, so I imported those mouth shapes in and changed the texture file in its respective timeline. So it's a new mouth expression each time! For future note, I could probably make the PNG files twice as big to fit more pixels in there, but I still liked the result in the end. If you watched the animation to the end, you would know that the music was composed by my good buddy Brandon. For the most part, I kinda let him do what he wanted with the music as long as it worked in context and followed what we both have in mind for future projects, while also still giving him some direction to follow. The train scene was very much inspired by nights I would be travelling home late at 10 PM, where the carriage is somewhat empty and I'd be listening to something calm or winding down like lo-fi hip-hop, knowing that I'd be going to bed pretty soon. It's when we're at the outpost when the music changes depending on what's happening. You might even notice each character have their own motifs. Darren and Alex with a motif where they're creating a plan of action, SL with an exciting, adventurous motif, and the pillagers with an alerting, scheming motif. By the way, you should all go give Brandon some love for me, cause he killed it with the music, and is likely to kill it again with all future music he does. I'll chuck his Instagram in the description. So, the 6-minute animation that was about the same length as my Minecraft Hunger Games animation took me almost 120 hours to complete. Which, cliche to say, it was longer than I expected. I initially scoped it to be around 3-ish minutes, but because the only planning I did was an outline and a simple Word document, I wouldn't be able to tell how long it would be. But fortunately, I still managed to get it done in a timely manner. If you've been fascinated by any of this stuff and want to learn how to do so yourself, I would be very interested in doing tutorials to tell you how to do any of these techniques yourself. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't watched the actual animation already, there'll be a card up on screen right now where you can go watch it. Hit the like, hit the bell icon, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.